Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to Read Becca for a book review. I'm going to talk about a book I read and really loved. It has kind of flown under the radar a bit, except the people who have read it all universally seem to love it, and I put it off way too long. That is The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I absolutely adored this sci-fi novel. So, starting off, the premise, very briefly, is really expansive. It's got a lot of thematic elements and messaging. It kind of feels to me like this mix between maybe Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed and The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Has very clear elements that connect to those, as well as a little vibe of almost Firefly, or it's not quite as feel-good and swashbuckling as that. Maybe the movie Serenity, but it has a found family crew type element at the core and traveling around to planets. So there's big, expansive sci-fi spanning years. For the person who has read this, I would say very quickly, so you maybe don't have to listen to everything I ramble about on this, go check out Robbie Arnott's The Rain Heron. It is not similar in any way from a plot perspective, but it does have a similar vibe, I think, and maybe writing style. It definitely carries out something akin to what goes on in Vanished Birds with the chapters, where the perspective shifts in each chapter, and every time it feels almost like interconnected short stories. It's not, but it's telling a different piece of the story with a total perspective shift. And Rain Heron feels very much like that. So if you are someone who read and loved this, I would really point you to check out The Rain Heron. So jumping back to my people who I would recommend this to that haven't read it, let's start getting into that aspect, this total perspective shift element. I kind of have to dig into the first 3 chapters, I think. I want to talk about those. The chapters are fairly long, but there are a number of chapters. It's a pretty long book. And they change perspectives with each chapter. In many cases, we are only getting one chapter from a particular person's perspective, and we don't ever come back to them. There are a couple characters we do come back to who are kind of the main prominent characters. But for instance, the very first chapter is not one of those repeat characters. We are coming to a planet, following this child who lives on a harvesting, sort of agrarian planet. And every 15 years of his life, this off-world ship comes and visits, and they pick up their harvest, basically, to take it back to satellite stations or space stations. And we're following every 15 years of this man's life as he grows from a child all the way to an old man. He's the child of the leader of the village. So we're learning about the culture of this harvesting, farming, tribal sort of society. And as we go through it, he develops a connection with the captain of this ship from off-world that is coming every 15 years. So what we learn over the course of that, and them developing this relationship that really changes over time, we see that while he is aging 15 years over the course, she's not. So what we see in the second chapter from her perspective is that she's traveling through pocket space in order to shorten the time. So for her, only 8 months is passing between these trips, while on either end, 15 years is passing. So in that second chapter, after the first chapter very much stands on its own as the story of this man's life, it would be a stellar short story completely on its own. It's got so much heart and emotion, and you really get into the character. And I think that's something that carries through all of this book. So moving into the second chapter, I don't have a ton to say about it, except that at the end of chapter 1, a young boy was injured and crash landed from off-world onto this planet. And obviously they don't know anything about off-worlders. They don't know how to deal with the situation of this boy clearly having been through something traumatic and not speaking to anyone there. And so they kind of do their best and then send him on his way with the off-worlders when they arrive. So then in chapter 2, we have the Offworlders having arrived and dealing with the situation with this boy on the planet, deciding that they will take him with them. So we're following Nia, the captain of this ship, who for me very much was the main character for all of this. Even though the boy is certainly prominent, I think Nia's perspective and just her experience captaining the ship and kind of shepherding the group that she runs is really integral in her relationship with the boy. So chapter 2 is mostly a quiet chapter of them journeying with this boy and what happens when they do get to the other side at this space station, as she has built up a relationship with him over months of trying to get to know him, trying to understand why he doesn't speak. And so it's a slow, character-focused aspect of her trusting this boy, the crew really being wary about him, and the clash between her and this established crew over that. And then chapter 3 is yet again a complete departure, because once they've reached the other end at the space station, now we jump into the perspective of a misunderstood genius who she was from Earth. We jump into her backstory as a child. She grew up in an ever-changing, a climate change facing Earth. And she, as a genius, was the person who came up with the technologies to create these space stations. And so she's innovated all of this. She went through some strange things in her upbringing. We saw the kind of genetic and technological advances that she went through on Earth. As a child, she was genetically engineered by a famous mother for certain reasons. So we get to see the ways that there's a burden placed on her based on the expectations that her mother has of her behavior and who she is to be. And we see her grow up, go through university. So we're getting a very expansive backstory again for this character. And then she becomes caught up in this whole story with this captain on the other side once they've reached the space station. This genius has a plan, and it's important for this captain and this boy to be involved. And we don't really know why at this point. So that's where I would leave the plot. So as you can see, those 3 chapters are just complete shifts in perspective and perception of the world. There is also a big underlying element that I would point out, back to what I said about the dispossessed. There's kind of a corporatism, capitalism thread running through this, where once we get to the space stations, we understand why is, this harvesting going on, and the upkeep of these space stations to keep everyone going is because they're run by a massive multi-planetary corporation. That corporation is very oppressive to the people in a subtle way, in that it has to maintain control and standards because these transports are traveling over 15 years, so you can't have everyone culturally and linguistically free, where language is going to change over those 15 years, and the people are going to arrive and not know how to communicate with each other, for instance. So they're maintaining strict controls over creativity and freedom of expression because they want to maintain those standards. So as a result, there are kind of these outlying planets, the free planets that are on the fringes, and as a result, a huge portion of this book winds up being a small ragtag crew kicking around these fringe planets. So we get to see a lot of really intriguing, very, very different and unique, quirky characters because of that. So that's kind of the Firefly element for me. From there, I just have to say the writing, the fact that this is a debut, it's incredible, because to what I described, this is such a tapestry of plotting. The characterization really feels vibrant, and we're truly getting a perspective from each character that's immensely unique. And the fact that he is able to throw in individual perspectives for just a single chapter, even changing style at points. One of the characters' perspectives is written through diary entries on the ship. So we're getting this layout of what's happening day to day in a very casual way. I think that uniqueness of voice is so present and different from anything I've seen before. So from a prose perspective, it has sort of a crisp, easy to read prose that's not overly flowery, but it is extremely rich and descriptive in a really beautiful way. So I just want to read a brief passage here. She watched with amusement the bird's splay-footed walk, thinking of how funny the creature looked, until the pelican perched itself on top of a boulder and unfolded its wings, drying its feathers in the light. Its wings open in presentation to the sky. As an adult, she would struggle to articulate the transcendence of this moment, the sudden shift she witnessed when that ugly bird became beautiful, the words turning the moment into something small and quaint. Impossible to capture the awe she felt as a child, the top of her head tingling as she gazed at the drying bird while her mother finished her interview. The light on its feathers, the feeling that at any moment it would ascend into some holy form. So you can see it just has that really rich quality to it, to the writing. So from a prose perspective, it's stunning. From a writing perspective, the fact that this is a blended tapestry of stories, it really feels woven together from many separate threads, is amazing that this is a debut. The characterization, each of these characters feels fully formed. The world building has so much to say, kind of to the comparisons that I made. There is a strong message through both the storytelling and the world building here. So I think that for me, this definitely puts Simon Jimenez on my radar at very minimum. But if I get into the follow-up, this is a standalone, but if I get into the follow-up sophomore novel, A Spear Cut Through Water, and enjoy it even half as much as this, Jimenez will be going on my auto-buy author list because this was just stellar. So that is it for The Vanished Birds. I highly recommend you pick this up if you are at all a sci-fi reader. Thank you so much for watching.